vacuum breakers, who and what?
Yeah, Rob, we import from a sister company in Spain these air release valves. Really, it's its primary use, which is about trying to get rid of and eliminating air out of pipelines. Now you might think, oh well, why would you do that? Well, part of the reason is that where velocities are very low, you can end up with a whole lot of air actually entrapped in a main line, and what it will do is it actually cause you a couple of things. One is high pressure losses at certain points, and the other thing is that with air entrapped in a pipeline, of course, when you take the pressure off, it expands.
Mm-hmm.
So you can end up with, where you've got very fast closing valves, you end up with water hammer.
What's water
as
hammer?
a result. It's basically where the pipe starts shaking and everything, because the energy has to go somewhere. Where a valve is closed off, the energy, and it starts bouncing. And of course you can imagine in a pipeline that's doing this sort of stuff, it's expanding and contracting.
It's not going to do it any good.
It limits its lifespan to a degree if it's outside of the elasticity of the product.
So these things are burpers. They burp the pipe.
They burp, yeah, effectively. And we've got a couple of types. We've got a simple unit, which is this one here. And effectively what happens is that when you start up a system, and this happens often in irrigation, it will allow any air that's entrapped in there at low pressure to escape the valve, and as soon as the pressure increases, the valve closes. So it actually stops any water from escaping from that point, but it eliminates any air that was in the pipeline.
So that goes at a fairly high point.
That goes at any high point in a main line, yeah, correct. And then we've got a triple effect version where, or in fact in New Zealand they'd call it double effect, where effectively it does exactly the same as this one, but if the air bubble is under pressure, it will actually allow the valve to open and burp just that bubble.
That's pretty clever.
Okay, so it's getting rid of entrapped pressure air, and it has quite an effect over how the main line performs.
So there must be little valves or something in there.
Yeah, if we have a look, luckily they undo reasonably well.
Yeah, they do.
But effectively there is a polystyrene float in here, which is actually going up against, you can see a rubber gasket at the top. So what happens is that as the water causes this to float up, it floats up and closes the valve. And in this case, because this is simple action, assuming that the float is not floating, it will pass air, and as soon as the water gets in there, it goes and closes.
Simple but effective.
Fairly simple but very effective. And this is the closing face here. And of course there's a very big surface in the top of the unit.
And you've got two different sizes.
Well, actually there's a number of sizes from 20mm up to 2 inch, and you can imagine at 2 inch this is passing a lot of air. So they are sized depending on what the pipeline is. So for a big pipeline you will end up with a bigger version of these.
Would you have more than one on a system?
Yes, you may have a number spaced at 500 or 600 metres apart along a long main line. At each point you are wanting to evacuate any air. But it's also about how fast the water is actually travelling along that pipeline. If the velocity of the water is high, it will tend to carry any air bubbles and other things with it. As the velocity decreases in a pipeline, the air starts to build up. So as the air builds up, actually the water has to go faster across this portion of the pipeline, therefore we end up with a pressure loss.
So what happens when you turn the pump off?
Essentially in a system, when you turn the pump off, the water is going to continue moving in the direction that it is going. Okay, so what will tend to happen is that if you don't have something that can allow air in, it'll actually cause the pipe to suffer a vacuum situation. And if the pipe is thin in the wall, it'll go and suck flat. So this is also the action of these devices. So they allow air to pass into the pipeline and actually fill the void of the water that's travelling along the pipeline. So essentially eliminating those issues.
So both ways.
Absolutely. So these are vacuum breakers as well as air release valves. And then in this one here, which is the dual effect or triple effect as they call it, essentially it has a slightly different float in here. So the float also has a port in the top of it, which allows pressure air to actually also come out of the system.